Sid. Hello, ProLife Alaska. I want to thank Sid Heidersdorf and John Monagle and all the other good people and incredible folks at Alaskans for Life for organizing this event. And I want to thank all of you for being here. I'm from Seattle. Originally, I was born in New Mexico, so I think I officially qualify as the coldest person here today. But when I came over here on the airplane, I always like to make a little sign of the cross on the outside body of the airplane before I come into the plane. And a gentleman behind me saw me do that today as I was flying from Seattle. And he says to me, "Scared of flying, eh?" And I said, "No, sir, I'm pretty good with flying. It's crashing I'm scared of." But you know, the pro-life movement is one moving entity that I am not afraid of crashing. Because in the pro-life movement, you would be here whether the weather was like this or not. We're not fair weather warriors, and you know what I mean when I say that. Regardless of whether we are winning or losing particular elections, we stand up for what is right. Regardless of whether we gain friends or lose friends, we stand up for what is right. Regardless of whether we are treated fairly or unfairly by the media, we stand up for what is right. There is no wrong time for us to stand up for those who are weak and vulnerable, and there is no price that is too high to pay. Now let's be honest, there are a lot of causes these days that are just fads. Some celebrity will suddenly get offended or outraged by something, and then all of a sudden a whole bunch of people think they have to be outraged by it too. And then a whole bunch of people start picketing and yakking on Twitter and Facebook. They start demonstrating, and maybe a bill gets introduced in Congress. Everyone gets passionate for a few months or even a couple of years. But then it doesn't last very long. Eventually people get bored and they disperse and they move on to the next trendy cause. But you and I know that the pro-life movement is not a fad. We don't belong to the church of what's happening now. Many people don't realize this, but the pro-life movement actually started well before Roe versus Wade in 1973. It actually goes back to the late 1960s, when a handful of states like New York, California, and my own home state of Washington State started weakening or removing the legal safeguards that had protected human beings early in their mother's womb before birth. So the pro-life movement's been around for about half a century, and we're getting bigger, and we're getting stronger all the time. Our noble cause is no fad, and it's never going out of style. Now, why does this movement endure? Have you thought about that? Why do we never grow tired and never fade away? I think that one reason is that even more than just being ingrained into our souls, this movement, our ultimate goal, is inscribed in our DNA as Americans, isn't it? At the dawn of this great nation, the Declaration of Independence proclaimed words that would reverberate all around the world and that we should never tire of saying. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just power from the consent of the governed. Too many people in our country have forgotten what these words mean. We in the pro-life movement are called to witness to the original meaning of these words. The right to life is meaningless unless everyone's rights are protected. The unborn, the disabled, the elderly, the frail, the weak, the terminally ill. If only the strong and the healthy and the politically powerful have the right to life, then we as a country have lost our collective soul. Recovering the meaning of these words must be at the very heart of everything we do as a pro-life movement. Now, I serve as the president of a pro-life organization called Healing the Culture, and we're not that far away from you, just in Seattle. And for the past 25 years, I've traveled all across the United States and Canada and even Europe, and this year we're expanding our mission into Africa. I've spoken to hundreds of schools and churches and conferences to hundreds of thousands of people. Everywhere I go, I see the same thing. The people who promote abortion have co-opted the words that define the very meaning of our lives as human beings. And they've turned human beings into material-focused, pleasure-seeking, ego-centered robots, enslaved by our sexual passions and devoid of any sense of responsibility to others or the common good. Our job is to take those words back and guide people back to a vision of the human person as intrinsically dignified, eternally valuable, and designed for a purpose greater than ourselves. It's our job in this movement to teach young people that Planned Parenthood and their cohorts are dead wrong. Happiness, my friends, is not about getting whatever you want, whenever you want, however you want to get it, regardless of the consequences to others and without any consequences to yourself. Happiness is about sacrificing ourselves for the good of others through generosity and compassion and love. Abortion will never lead people to this greater vision of happiness. Quality of life is not about being genetically perfect, physically independent, and materially wealthy. Quality of life is about experiencing the parts of life that open us up to faith and hope and love. And abortion will never lead people to this greater view of quality of life. Love is not about lusting after someone, affirming their vices, and tolerating all the things that they do to harm themselves or others. Love is about wanting what is actually best for the other and being able to sacrifice ourselves for the good of another. Abortion will never lead people to this view of love. Freedom is not about having all my options open all the time and being able to choose whatever I want without restrictions, without responsibilities, or without rules. Freedom is being able to choose and see what is truly good, even if it requires respect for the very rules that lead to civilized behavior and to justice. Abortion will never lead people to this greater vision of freedom. Rights are not about my choices, my freedoms, my future, my wants, my desires, and my selfish pursuits. Rights are about my duty to protect the life, liberty, and property of others, and then, and only then, expecting others to do the same for me. Abortion will never lead people to this greater vision of human rights. Now, because we live in a free society where the freedom of speech and expression and assembly, freedom of the press and protest are still protected, you and I have a special duty to proclaim this greater vision of these words to the people of Alaska and to the people of the whole world. When we can recover the true meaning of these words, there is hope that we can change people's minds, touch their hearts, and lead to a lasting conversion. Because our message, our vision of the meaning of life is so much more appealing than our opponent's empty, vacuous, self-centered, and dark and depressing vision of the meaning of life, isn't it? Let me give you an example of what I mean. Just this last week, I gave 2 days of speeches, 7 hour-and-a-half-long talks to the 500 boys of O'Day High School, an all-boys high school in Seattle. By the end of those 2 days, after every single one of my talks, dozens of guys would come up to me, shake my hand with a look of awe on their face that they had never heard this before. They'd never heard this dignified mission of love and freedom and justice and rights and the meaning and dignity of the human person. One young man told me that his mother had aborted his older sibling before he had been conceived, and that he had always been told that this was a good thing. And he said that now, after hearing my talk, he grieved for his mother and what she must be going through every day to justify it. Another young man told me that his whole family is pro-choice, and he had heard me the day before, in one of my talks the day before, and he had in his hand a permission slip to board one of the buses this coming Monday in Seattle to go to the March for Life in Olympia in Washington. He said, I don't know how I talked my pro-choice mother into signing it, but I'm going. And another young man came up to me and he told me, I'm Jewish, at a Catholic boys' school. He says, I'm still Jewish, but now I'm pro-life. These are the differences that you can make to change people. Now, I know not everybody can give speeches in schools like I can, so what can you actually do? Well, there's an organization called Americans United for Life, and every year they release a ranking of states based on the laws that they have on the books to protect vulnerable and innocent human life. States that have the most legal protections are ranked at the top of the list. This year, Oklahoma ranks as #1 with the most pro-life legal protections. The state on the very bottom of the list that ranks the worst in terms of pro-life laws with the most pro-abortion laws is your neighbor to the south, my home state of Washington. So you may be asking yourself, well, what the heck are you doing here in Alaska? Get back to Washington and do something about your own problems. But you see, my husband and I have a special liking for Alaska. My husband lived here for 25 years. He comes here often to work on pro-life laws and bills. And someday we hope to retire here. So we're taking our stake here by being part of this movement with you here today and for as long as it takes. We have a choice to react to what we are, and here is where we are in Alaska. Your state ranks number 34. That puts you basically in the bottom third of states in this country. About 2/3 of the states in the United States of America are doing better than Alaska when it comes to passing pro-life laws. So how are we going to react? We can be depressed about that fact. We can become cynical and say, politics is hopeless. But I think that there's a better choice. And the pro-life movement is all about better choices, isn't it? This choice is to say someday Alaska is going to be #1. Someday we're going to be the state that has the most pro-life laws and the most pro-life culture. Someday we're going to be the state that has the fewest abortions and eventually none. Because we're not going to stop fighting until every life is considered sacred by law. Can you imagine that? Do you dare to imagine that that is possible? Obviously, a lot of things have to change to get that kind of Alaska. So where does that sort of change start? Well, it starts with you, and it starts with me. It starts when we look in the mirror and we say, I don't have all the answers, but I'm going to do my part to build a pro-life future. Instead of cursing the darkness, I'm going to light one candle, or maybe two, or maybe build a whole bonfire. There are many ways that we can build a pro-life future. Getting involved in politics is one way, but it's certainly not the only way. But I want to challenge those of you who live in Juneau to think about this. You have a special responsibility to be engaged in what goes on in the building behind me. Most Alaskans would have to buy a plane ticket and rent a hotel room just to come here and lobby the legislature in person, but you don't face those obstacles. So I want to encourage you to be involved in what goes on in this building behind me. Don't be a stranger in these hallways. Get to know the pro-life lawmakers who work in this building. Ask them what you can do to help them pass good pro-life bills and defeat bad bills. And now in recent years, there have been some very good pro-life bills passed in the Alaska legislature, but some of these have been obstructed by the court system. So instead of just taking it for granted that we can't do anything about the liberal judges, ask your lawmakers what actions can we take to counteract the liberal courts that are always exceeding their authority. Reforming the judicial system is possible. It takes leadership. It takes good people like you encouraging your legislators to pursue it. I want to let you know I'm very hopeful about the future. I've seen the power of ideas to change individual hearts, and which then in turn can change the entire culture and the trajectory of history. You know, there was a time centuries ago when slavery was taken for granted. People assumed that it was just going to be around forever, right? But leaders like William Wilberforce rose up and said, we have a vision for a future that is better, a future where this evil is no longer tolerated. Thanks to their hard work and their vision, and thank God for their persistence, you and I now live in a better world because people like William Wilberforce did not retreat and did not give up. even when they were subjected to scorn and ridicule. You know, in my lifetime, people once believed that the Berlin Wall would be around forever. Hundreds of millions of people in Europe lived under the yoke of communist oppression. But most intellectuals told us that we better get used to it because it was just going to be around forever, and it was dangerous and irresponsible to think otherwise. Fortunately, there were courageous leaders like Ronald Reagan and Pope John Paul II who did envision a different, better future, a future in which communist oppression would be consigned to the ash heap of history. The Berlin Wall fell in 1989, and the Soviet Union fell a few years later, and the world is a better place. So I want to encourage you to be hopeful. Change is possible. Yesterday, the President of the United States was a man who worked for the last 8 years to promote abortion in almost every way imaginable. Today, a new president has been inaugurated who has promised to reverse many of those damaging policies that human beings have suffered under for the past 8 years. And we should all pray that our new president keeps those promises, because the obstacles in his path will be formidable. We should pray for his success in this area. In closing, I want to leave you with a little story that I hope inspires you. My husband Michael and I have 2 little girls. Juliet is 7 and Elizabeth is 4. When Juliet was only 5, she used to have these little dolls she would play with. They were called spaghetti girls. And they had these skinny little rubbery arms and legs, and you could detach their heads and their torsos and their arms and legs and kind of interchange them. It's a little creepy, I know, but anyway, one day we were playing with these spaghetti dolls, and she gives me one that has just a head and an upper torso. So I'm kind of waving it around, and I'm saying, oh look, I'm half a person. And my daughter Juliet, at 5 years old, said, Mommy, how can you be half a person if you're a person? My 5-year-old daughter is smarter than the past president of the United States of America. So when she runs for office, please vote for her. In the meantime, you've heard the expression, I've read the book and I know that what matters most, and I know who wins in the final chapter. Well, it's true. Don't forget that. Stay strong, stay faithful, and God bless you for your work. God bless Alaska, and God bless America.
Thank you, Camille. My, amen, amen.